Afternoon, everyone. We are actually a minute or so late, so I thought I'd ask you guys to take your seats. So when you guys are ready to do the live stream, you're live streaming now? Okay, then we're good. And we are good. As chair of the Arkansas School Safety Commission, I call our meeting on July 12th, 2022 to order. The first item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from July 5th. I will entertain a motion at the appropriate time. Chief Hollenbeck makes a motion to approve the minutes. Linda Graham seconds. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you all very, very much for being here. I just want to generally say that when we started this process, what seems like a couple of weeks ago, but yet it's been a long time. It seems like a long time. We as a group have accomplished an enormous amount. And we've been pushing really, really hard. And I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for all the hard work that you've done on this. We are to get our interim report ready, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. The one thing that we have on our agenda, and I want to do a little bit of a preface on this, and that's when we talk about school shootings, one of the things that we have to realize is that we have not been immune in Arkansas. And I know we all talk about West Side, 1998, and 6 deaths, 10 injuries, if I'm not mistaken, and how horrific it was for us as a state. But there are 3 others that actually have occurred since the last time that we met as a commission. And so I want to talk about those just a little bit so that we can keep our eye focused on Arkansas a little bit more. We actually had 2 shootings in 2019. One of those was at Prescott School District. It was 1 student. Both of them were 8th graders. They were 14 years old, and one pulled a gun and shot the other. Fortunately, the student that was shot did not die, so it didn't go down as a death, thankfully. In April, another 14-year-old went into the bathroom at the Concord School District next to the cafeteria and ended his life with a gun. And then in 2021, and this was a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old, was the Watson Chapel incident. That was very, very pointed. So I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page. What I find really interesting, I don't know if you remember the Secret Service studies that we had and that we looked at early on in our process. And they talked about that there were certain months that seemed to be more prevalent than others. Do you remember what the #1 month was? April. It's April. So basically, our two shootings in 2019 were both in April, and West Side was at the end of March, so it wasn't that far from April. And I didn't realize it until I started looking at this information on these shootings. So we need to make sure that we keep these victims in mind. And I know you guys are doing everything that you possibly can to make sure that we provide recommendations that are going to enhance the safety of all of our kids across the state, because we can talk about things in other states. Now, one of the key things on our agenda today, as many of you know, ALERT, which is a group out of Texas State University, basically the national premier organization for active shooter training in the country, did a report on the Uvalde shooting. Now, I'm going to make a couple of comments before I turn it over to Sheriff Helder and his team. But this does not bode very well in a number of different respects. And it's very important that we keep in mind that these actions were done by a specific group of law enforcement officers. And that this is not the way all law enforcement deal with these kind of situations. And that we need to be very careful about making generalizations. This is about what the law enforcement in the Uvalde area did in this incident. So having said that, Sheriff Helder, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit more specifically about what's mentioned in this report.
So last week, prior to our committee meeting, subcommittee meeting, we received the report that ALERT published. They were allowed into the school to kind of do a investigative study, so to speak, to find out what took place, what went wrong, what caused this horrific event, other than the attacker. So just as a little background, I hope you all have taken time to read it. It's not a fun read, makes me sick at my stomach, and we're going to go through it again. I don't know why we put ourselves through this, but I think it's important as we move forward, Madam Chair, that we understand the critical nature of our convening and the decisions that we make, and that we push, and that we keep driving forward to get some meaningful legislation and suggestions put forth. So anyway, Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas, the attack happened on May 24th. 21 fatalities, 2 of which were students. 19 were students and 2 were teachers. Madam Chair alluded to the fact that ALERT is a premium or premier expert in this area. They have actually were named by the FBI as the national standard in active shooter response. And our subcommittee will be coming forward with some recommendations about ALERT later on. But at any rate, the purpose of discussing this today, I think, is not to vilify, as Madam Chair indicated, but it's really to look at the events as they transpired and how do they fit in with some of the recommendations we've made in the past. What are some of the recommendations that we may be making moving forward? So I will just give a brief overview of what I think is important, and I'll ask Chief Hollenbeck to kind of go over the timeline. He's got it on his laptop, and I think it may take a little bit, but I think it's critical that we understand how much time passed at each juncture of everything that happened. So to set the scene, this individual had committed a homicide. We don't know clearly yet if for sure that there was a pursuit or not, but we do know that the suspect crashed his vehicle in the close proximity of the school. He was seen exiting with a long rifle. Uvalde police officer pulled up on the scene, There have been some mentions that there were rounds fired as he came out of the car. When he pulled up, the first officer on scene had the suspect in his sights. And for whatever reason, which is beyond us, I don't really know. I know that it was alluded to that he was afraid that if he missed, he hadn't trained at that distance with his long rifle, that if he missed, it might harm somebody within the school. So we don't know what exactly was going on, but he asked for permission to engage the subject, which is foreign to those law enforcement officers I know that are sitting here today. But for whatever reason, that's what happened. The suspect then entered the building. Now, Bill, if you'll take it from there and talk about how the teacher came out and then went back in. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sheriff Helder. I'll just go through the timeline. As Sheriff Helder said, as we go through this, it is heartbreaking and aggravating, but we have to look at this in detail so we can improve to make sure that that does not happen here in Arkansas. So at 11:27, a female teacher exited the exterior building at the west hallway, propping the door open with a rock to prevent it from closing behind her. At 11:28, the suspect becomes involved in the motor vehicle crash. This story doesn't really, or this report does not tell us why he crashed into that dry canal near the elementary school. Two people from a nearby business approached the crash scene at 11:29, and the suspect engaged them both with a rifle. Two people were able to flee back into the business unharmed, where they called 911. At 11:29, the female teacher returns to the west entry, deliberately kicking the rock from the door jamb. The female pulls the door shut and continues to look out at the exterior door as she is frantically speaking on her cell phone. She attempts to enter the south door or enter the door on the south side of the west hallway, only to find that it is locked. The female knocked on the door and it was eventually answered by another female. The female appears to advise female number 2 of the emergency as to what is happening. The female then re-enters the hallway numerous times, yelling down the halls for the students to get into their classrooms. So at 11:30, the suspect, who's wearing dark clothing and carrying a bag, left the crash scene and climbed a chain link fence around the elementary school. The suspect walked deliberately across the open grounds between the fence and the teacher's parking lot. The suspect moved towards the building on the westmost side of the campus. Although the defect that might have been caused by a bullet was located on the south side of the structure, it could not be substantiated at this time. At 11:31, the suspect is captured on video between the cars shooting, and a Uvalde police unit is captured arriving at the crash site at this time. 11:31, a Uvalde school police department officer arrives on the west gate near the crash site and across the field on the south side of the affected building at a high rate of speed, responding to the scene. 11:32, the suspect reached the west teacher's parking lot adjacent to the affected building and fired through the windows into the westmost classrooms. Prior to the suspect entering the building at 11:33, according to statements of a Uvalde police officer on scene at the crash site, he observed the suspect carrying a rifle outside the West Hall entry. So this would be next door to the school itself. The officer was armed with a rifle, a patrol rifle. He asked the supervisor for permission to shoot the suspect. However, the supervisor either did not hear or responded too late, and the officer turned to get confirmation from his supervisor, but at that time, the suspect had already entered the building unabated. At 11:33, the suspect entered the school from the exterior door of the West Hall while holding a rifle. The suspect looked around the hallway, then continued to walk down the west hallway before turning right, which is south on the hallway. The suspect walked past a series of rooms with closed doors and a fire break wall before making his way into room 111 and to room 112. At 11:33, upon reaching these rooms, the suspect fired a series of rounds from the hallway into the direction of the classrooms. 11:33:32, the suspect made entry into what appears to be room 111, You can immediately hear screams from children could be heard, along with numerous gunshots in the classrooms. The rate of fire initially was very rapid, then slowed, lasting only for a few seconds. At 11:33:37, the suspect backed out of what appears to be room 111 into the south hallway. The suspect made a slight turn to what appears to be his left and fires a series of rounds into the hallway, or from the hallway into class 112. The suspect then re-enters what appears to be classroom 111 and continues to fire what is estimated to be over 100 rounds by 11:36. You can still hear children screaming and crying. So after the suspect made entry into the west building, 3 Uvalde police officers arrived on a street called Geraldine Street in front of the school drop-off pickup area, and the officers, using a bounding overwatch tactic, moved quickly one at a time to the west door. 11:35, 3 Uvalde Police Department officers entered the structure through the west door of the west hallway. These officers were equipped with the following weapons. 1 had external body armor and 2 had concealable body armor, 2 rifles and 3 pistols. At 11:36, 4 officers entered the south hallway through the south door closest to the suspect, and it's not clear what equipment these officers had with them at that time. 4 more officers then entered the west hallway through the west door at 11:36. 3 of these officers were with the Uvalde Police Department and 1 with the school police department. They were equipped with external body armor carriers and 1 with concealable body armor, and they were armed with pistols. It did not appear that any of the officers were in possession of breaching tools, any medical equipment, ballistic shields, or also known as go bags for situations such as this. At 11:36, the last shots of the initial barrage from the suspect was fired. There were 7 officers in the west hallway and 4 officers in the south hallway. Also at 11:36, 10 seconds, officers from the west and south hallway advanced to rooms 111 and 112. As the officers entered the threshold of rooms 111 and 112, they were fired upon by the suspect who was in room 111. The gunfire at 11:37 and 11:37, 10 seconds, drove the officers from that threshold in front of room 112 and 111 back into the west hallway and the south hallways prior to either team making contact with either room 111 or 112. At 11:38, the suspect continued to fire. According to the audio estimates, 11 more rounds were fired. Investigators advised that 2 officers were injured by building material fragments caused by the suspect's rounds passing through the walls. Officers generally remained at the intersection of the west hall and south hallway, and in the south hallway near the south entrance until the final assault occurred. At 11:38, officers were on scene, but outside the hallway, call for additional assistance to include a tactical team with specialized capabilities was made at 11:38. At 11:38, with 37 seconds, an officer outside the hallway advised that the suspect is contained. 11:40, the suspect fires 1 round, according to the audio estimates. At 11:41, dispatch asked via radio if the door was locked, and a UPD officer responds, "I'm not sure, but we have a hooligan bar to break it." That's actually called a Halligan bar. It's a pry tool that is utilized to have forced entry specifically on doors that open outward. Doors that open outward are an extremely difficult door to enter, so that's why you have to have that type of tool. At 11:44, the suspect fires 1 round, according to audio estimates. At 11:48, a Uvalde school PD officer enters the west hallway through the door and states on the radio she's been shot, and I believe he's referring to his wife, and he is escorted outside of the building. At 11:51, law enforcement from various agencies, including Uvalde PD, the school police department, Uvalde Sheriff's Office, fire marshals, constable deputies, Southwest Texas Junior College Police Department, and the United States Border Patrol had arrived on scene, were moving inside to evaluate the situation. At 11:52, the first ballistic shield entered the west hallway. At 11:53, the DPS or Texas Department of Public Safety special agent arrived at the perimeter and was advised to man the perimeter. And an officer makes a comment about kids still being inside the building. And the DPS agent advised if there's kids, then we need to go in. At 11:56:49, the DPS special agent stated that there are kids over there, so I'm getting the kids out. At 12:03:51, a second ballistic shield arrives. At 12:04, a third ballistic shield arrived on scene. At 12:06, UPD, I believe these are dispatch notes, says that there's no command post to set up. Advised they needed bodies to keep the parents out. At 12:10, officers in the west hallway began passing out and donning gas masks. CS gas at 11:14 and a launchable delivery device are brought into the building. At 12:13, dispatchers had received numerous 911 calls from a child explaining that there were several children and one of her teachers deceased and another teacher was hurt in room 112. 12:15, it appears a tactical team arrives from the United States Border Patrol, also known as BORTAC. They arrive and assist with fortifying the law enforcement positions at the intersection with ballistic shields. At 12:20, a fourth ballistic shield arrives in the west hallway. At 12:21, 4 more shots are fired by the suspect within one of the 2 classrooms. At 12:21, Border Patrol tactical officers members, they moved to a double set of doors within 36 feet of rooms 111 and 112, bringing 2 ballistic shields. However, no assault on the room was conducted. At 12:33, the Border Patrol medical team members began setting up a medical triage on the east hallway in front of the restrooms. They had numerous backboards and medical kits, the defibrillator, as well as bleeding control supplies. At 12:21, 16 seconds until 12:34, 38 seconds, a continuous conversation takes place in the south hallway involving the school police department police chief Arredondo and a UPD officer discussing tactical options and considering including snipers, windows, and how to get into the classroom. They also discussed who had the keys, how to test the keys, and the probability of the door being locked if the kids and teachers are inside the room dead or dying. Border Patrol agents arrive in the west hallway at 12:35 and observe the first observed breaching tool, a Halligan tool, is present. At 12:37, the school PD chief Arredondo attempts to negotiate with the suspect, speaking in English and in Spanish. The chief also calls someone to try to look into the windows from the outside. He then begins asking for more keys. At 12:46, he exclaims, "If you all are ready, do it, just do it. But you should distract him out that window." I believe he's referring to probably a rake and break technique used to distract the suspect as the rest of the team would enter through the door. At 12:47, Chief Arredondo states he's going in, tell the guys on the west side they're going in, let them know. A USO deputy arrives at the west hallway with the sledgehammer. At 12:15, the ad hoc team assaults the room, neutralizing the suspect. At 12:50, with 3 seconds, they enter the room, neutralizing the suspect. The suspect had concealed himself in a book closet. He then emerged when the team made entry. Footage showed officers frantically carrying the dead and injured to the casualty collection point to the east hallway. Some law enforcement officers rushed casualties directly through the exterior door out the end of the west hallway. It's unknown if medical personnel such as EMS were staged nearby for direct patient standoff or handoff. The results of this incident was 19 children, 2 adults killed, and 17 reported injuries. Additionally, the suspect was neutralized through gunfire in the assault.
So that was an hour and 20 minutes,
Yes,
if my calculation is correct.
that's correct. As Sheriff Helder kind of made mention, there was an opportunity before the event took place with the patrol officer arriving on scene when he saw the suspect entering or walking on school campus with the assault rifle. The other potential contributing factor is, of course, unlocked doors. Even though, we discussed this in our committee meeting, even though the teacher may have kicked the rock away from the door to close it, a lot of doors and door hardware takes a certain amount of energy or gravity to swing to shut the door completely. So if it's very small, it might not have gained enough momentum to shut the door effectively. So-
According to the report, though, they did test that, and that was not the case in this particular incident. What I found particularly interesting and was the fact that on all their exterior doors, the alert folks found little piles of rocks. Some of them were painted. We talk about creating cultures of security. They were creating a culture that it was okay to prop your doors open.
That's correct. Unfortunately.
Another finding was that the classroom door, they believe, was unlocked for the entire event. They also believe that there had been work orders submitted for class 111 to get the lock fixed. They couldn't find any record of the work orders, but at any rate, it wasn't locked. And there were just, this isn't about vilifying. This is about going over an incident with real fact that we can look at as we move forward and make recommendations, but it doesn't matter. It goes back to what you said, Dr. May. The culture has to be changed on just putting rocks in front of doors, not taking seriously the charge to unlock, and then you've got the human element that's involved in all of this. They also were one of the, Alert is in Texas. I mean, that's kind of where they started. But it was my understanding, one of the takeaways was that they had not availed themselves to the Alert active training. So when we talk about, it's unfathomable, unconscionable that they would gather and not charge the room. We all believe that to be so, but if they had not been through the training, standard procedure in a law enforcement incident, you gather. If somebody said he's contained, you start thinking about negotiations and all that. I don't know what their mindset was, but it was horrific. Of course, we all believe they should have charged the room and never stopped until the guy was out. But anyway, I don't know any other
Chief Chapman
takeaways.
Do you want to talk about the Alert program a little bit?
I will. So obviously there's a lot of things to be learned from this horrific incident. The positive takeaway that I would speak to with Alert is that the officers that are trained here in the state of Arkansas are trained to respond in a totally different fashion. And that is one of the focus of our subcommittees group, is to make those recommendations that we ensure that all of our law enforcement officers are trained to effectively and properly address these issues. So Alert is basically 3 different concepts. They have a law enforcement specific training that teaches the gun toters how to respond effectively to a critical incident active shooter event. Then they have a civilian side, which is just as important. It teaches the civilian staff, our civilian community members, how to survive from the start of that critical incident to the time law enforcement gets there. And then they have the third component is an integrated response that concentrates on the casualty care after the fact. How does fire, EMS, and law enforcement engage to save lives? It's a very well put together platform of training. It is accepted regionally by all states surrounding us as their gold standard training, accepted by our federal partners. And it is something that we need to consider. One of the things that, if I can bring out something that stands out to me in the report, is the lack of command and control. There were numerous agencies that did respond to this incident that had been Alert trained, DPS. The lack of command and control probably created more havoc in a very critical time when they needed leadership. And again, not to vilify but to simply point out that you need a strong leadership platform during a critical incident. Someone should have been giving direction. And then the fact that you have officers that didn't feel they had the discretion to do what they needed to do at the very beginning. I mean, if that shot could have been taken before he ever entered the building, I mean, we all three agree that he should not have had to ask permission. And your officers need to be trained that they need to be properly trained where they feel proficient in taking that action. And then they need to be feel independent to make that decision in those critical situations. So.
And that's done through use of force policies, is
Absolutely.
it not? And that all officers or deputies, depending upon their agency, or those policies are adopted and then they're trained on those policies, correct?
Correct, ma'am.
One of the other elements that was brought up too is that there was apparently another officer that was, I think, in a vehicle and driving around the area. And he drove right by him and didn't see him because he was going too fast. So the moral of that story is, and what Alert recommends, is that when it comes to that type of campus safety, either drive a lot slower or foot patrol. And that they believe that if he had been walking around the campus on foot, that he would have been able to see him before he entered the building. So it's a heartbreaking incident on so many different levels. But as you know, these great examples of the quality of law enforcement that we have in Arkansas, we have got to make sure that we use these lessons and make sure that nothing like this happens in our state. So I'd like to open it up for any kind of discussion or questions. Those of you who might not be in law enforcement might have some questions. And so this would be a good opportunity that if you have any questions to ask. Linda?
How in most other counties, districts, whatever, and honestly, it didn't seem like they had any kind of multi-agency training either. And you know as well as I do, when something happens, everybody's going to come. So would it not be beneficial for the training to include not just Jonesboro PD or the county sheriff, for them to train together in the school setting, and even involve the little towns around that are close by, that their officers are going to show up?
So absolutely, that's the advantage of having a statewide training platform, that all of our officers are required to attend and train on the same level. I'm sure that the sheriffs are familiar with this, and we do it in Garland County, but each of our law enforcement agencies are trained the exact same way for active shooter response together at different times, but we're all have the basic same level of training, the basic concept. So when we do respond, because it is an all hands on deck, that is exactly how an active shooter or a critical incident will evolve. You will have blue uniforms, brown uniforms, green uniforms. You will have detectives. And the thought process is, starting at the academy level, which is where our alert training starts. We start training alert at the academy level. So rookie officers are trained in the basics. And then we would like to see, hopefully, a recommendation of statewide mandated training for all agencies. But yes, absolutely.
And to kind of echo what the chief said about command and control, in this particular case, they lost the momentum. It is so vitally important to have somebody, whether it's the chief or a sergeant or a police officer, who knows the importance of speed, diversion, surprise, and at times violence of action. Even though they're pushed back initially on their first assault when they got shot at through the door, that experienced command and control leader has to push that team again and again and again and again. And whether it's alert training or some sort of unified and uniform training, all the officers have to know that, but they have to have that specific type of training to to know that if their current leader at the time is not pushing that, then it's up to that individual officer to continue to push that. You don't have to have a sergeant or a chief of police to state, go rescue and go stop that threat, go rescue those kids. Everybody has to know that, and everybody has to be on the same page.
And-
that
and-
uniform training is so vitally important.
And that's the way Alert teaches it, from what I understand, is that the initial is to neutralize the threat above everything else. Chief Chapman, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's called priority of work. And so the training that we recommend, that we're familiar with, the priority of work for a law enforcement officer is to stop the killing. That's our priority of work. Everything else becomes secondary. And from a leadership standpoint, rank has nothing necessarily to do with leadership on a critical incident. Most qualified person is in command of that situation until a more qualified person arrives on scene. I think that is very evident that we did not see this based on the report that we have. No one took control of the situation. And I believe that led to failure, which cost lives. But the training that we advocate, the officers bypass wounded individuals. They bypass evacuating people that are not in harm's way to neutralize the threat. And that's what saves lives. Everything else is secondary in a critical incident, in a mass shooting, an active shooter event. We stop and neutralize the threat. Once that is done, everything else becomes secondary and third priorities.
The other thing that I think is really important in this whole case situation is that they eventually did have the equipment they needed to do that. And there's some specialized equipment that we've all talked about in particularly the law enforcement and security subcommittee, the ballistic shields, the halogens, the sledgehammers. And, you know, we don't know exactly how many of our schools, let alone law enforcement in general, have this type of equipment. So one of the things that we're going to end up doing on this 2022 assessment that I'll talk about here in a second is to find out how many actually do. We suspect it's going to be very limited, but being able to have access to that equipment. And while I know law enforcement, many law enforcement officers, and I know where their heart is, I also want to know they're protected and they can do what they need to do to save a kid or to save kids or to save somebody with the best equipment possible. And actually, Dr. Hopkins, I was going to ask you a question with regard to that equipment. You know, one of the primary function of having commissioned school security officers in your schools is to be there if there's an active shooter incident. So when we talk about CSSOs, are they also trained the same way that law enforcement is? And would they also not need the same equipment that law enforcement would need in a similar situation?
Well, in our district, they are trained using the alert training model. And as far as equipment, I believe that it is proven that a district have that kind of equipment available to where they can gain access to a classroom in a situation like that. Because when we talk about, you know, securing classroom doors, outside doors, inside doors, that's a double-edged sword. Because if the active shooter, now we know in this case, he did not secure the door, but that could have been the case. And a lot of schools have, because we have to run schools on a budget, have built-in systems where when they get into that classroom, there may be some sort of a device that they have rigged up that falls over a doorknob or something of that nature to secure the door from being open from the outside.
You can't get in from the outside.
That's correct. And so you'd have to have some piece of equipment to breach that lock and breach that device that they've got in place. And again, it's one of those double-edged swords where you want to be able to secure that classroom to prevent the entry in the very first place. But then you also have to think about, okay, what if entry is made? Now, how do we get in to stop that person? But to answer your question, yes, our trainers that have come into our district to help our emergency response team, our CSSO individuals, they are trained with this alert model. And from the very beginning, we've always been taught, go to the sound of gunfire, stop the killing. That's job one. Bypass everything else, get there, stop the shooter. And whether that be you tie him up with, your harassment with him, trying to deal with you, takes his mind off of everything else until the cavalry gets there, or you're able to stop that person. But that's the focus. And then once that is eliminated, then alert has this huge intricacy of how to go about triaging and dealing with the other issues that arise from an active shooter.
Yeah.
It's a
Sheriff-
great program.
Sheriff Helder, when we look at those questions that we're going to submit for the 2022 school safety assessment, I know we asked about equipment, but we didn't necessarily ask about the alert training for CSSOs, did we?
I don't believe we did. I think our primary focus dealing with alert was probably to make a formal recommendation whenever it comes to that, but we didn't consider asking who was trained through alert. We
Yeah.
can do that.
Yeah, I think it might be a good idea
Okay.
that we ask that.
The other thing I wanted to mention while we're here also, and Chief Hollenbeck was talking about how the responding officer have the freedom to be able to act appropriately or in the way that they feel like they needed to act at that time, that they didn't have to seek permission from someone else to be able to engage or whatever they needed to do. And that also plays over into how we train our teachers in their classrooms, because the culture in schools is so much that you follow the rules. You line up at the water fountain. You don't let the children leave the classroom until everybody's quiet, everybody's in line, and we do it orderly. And the mentality has to change in an active shooter situation, and you have to empower your staff and let them know that they get to make the decision at that point. You don't wait for the intercom to come on and tell you what to do. If you think you can get out of the building, you get out of the building. You don't have to wait for permission. And if those kids run and hit that door and are in the wind, that's great. Get them out of it. We'll collect them later. But that's one of our mentalities, that it is very hard, and training is what's going to get us over that.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, they actually did call a lockdown in the case of Uvalde. It's just that door 111 didn't lock.
Right.
Because
Well,
my understanding is he went down the hallway trying doors, and all the other ones were locked, and it was through 111. Then he tried to get into 112 and couldn't because it was locked, but then realized there was that adjacent door between those two classrooms, and that's how he got access to 112.
right. And in the Uvalde situation, it was a little bit different. That guy was in there and he was in there rapidly. However, in some situations, it might have been that the classrooms at the end of that hallway could have hit that door and been out on the other end of the building and exited that building. And that, had the situation been different and they had tried to remain in their classroom, something tragic could have happened there. But the fact is, though, that the teachers need to feel empowered to be able to react the way they need to react, given what's happening right there at that point in time. And I think training is how that happens.
Yeah, and I think it's also important that, and I think it was during Director Gary's subcommittee audits, EOPs, and drills, that the security director at the Bentonville School District, Steve Vera, gave a presentation and did a phenomenal job talking about how really important it was to do, we could talk about these three-year comprehensive school site safety assessments and how important they are. But there needs to be audits that are done on a regular basis where folks go around and they check the doors, where if a door is not locked, people are held accountable because they're not locked. And in our opinion, in this subcommittee, it was very, very clear that Director Vera was setting the culture with school safety in those buildings on the Bentonville School District campus. And I think it all struck us, when we look back at the recommendations that we did previously, one of the recommendations was that, every school campus have what we call a school safety coordinator, Well, those are the individuals that should be setting the tone and setting the culture within their district. So, you know, there's some good things that can come of this that we did not know. Any other comments?
I have another one.
No,
Of
you're
cour-
not
of course,
allowed.
Of course. You told me I wasn't talking enough.
I know I did, didn't I?
I was waiting. Okay, I agree, the ballistic shields and everything, but where are those kept? Are they in the police? I know with my brother, all his stuff was in the trunk of his car. The SROs are not gonna, or CCSOs aren't gonna be able to get out to the car to get their stuff. So what is a way to make that easily available for them? Because they're most likely gonna be the first ones there responding. Any suggestions?
You know, the reality, and I can just answer with our district, it's the reality and I don't want to go too deep into means and methods of what our officers will do or their capabilities or where things are specifically kept, but more than likely that officer is going to be very hard pressed to leave the scene to go get the equipment that he needs when there's killing that is being conducted. You know, his job or her job is to go to that threat and stop that threat. It's the responding officers probably that will be responding with that type of equipment as well. Now, if some of this equipment is kept in, you know, the SRO or the CSSO's office or the officer's office, and he has time to grab it, then certainly. But I think all that can be worked out individually with each district and each agency. But to go directly into means and methods as to where things are going to be kept, we might not want to talk about that in a session such as this.
Doc May,
Yes, ma'am.
Madam Chair, if I may. And certainly we all agree that greatest tragedies bring the greatest lessons to us. And we're seeing this through this case. And I appreciate you, Chief, for walking us through this timeline. But I think it may benefit the public as to understand alert training just a little bit more and how long that would take. Because as a parent, before I sent my child to a school, in light of these instances, I would want to know whether or not the faculty were trained or whether or not school personnel or high school students were trained and what that entails. I know, but let's make sure the public understands it, because I want parents talking to their school board members and talking to their local officers and making this a priority, as well as our legislators.
So absolutely, General. I'll take that. I conduct a lot of training and very proud to do that. So let's take the school, for instance, staff at school. It's a 4-hour training session. It's very intense. It is a classroom presentation that can be followed up with additional steps. I've trained classes as small as 10 to 12 to auditoriums full of school employees, community employees, churches, those type things. So the classroom setting can be geared to whatever size class you'd like. And then we also offer, as part of that training, a threat assessment of the facility to assist the school in conducting a threat assessment of the facility. And then we do some scenario-based training with them, so they actually are put through some scenarios with their local law enforcement officers. The greatest thing about alert training, other than it being the premier training, it is free. It is free. We cannot charge for the training. It is done as a benefit by your local agencies with your school districts to ensure that we are saving lives. And but the sessions themselves are built around 4-hour blocks of training, and can be done very easily at no expense or very little expense.
Could you explain to her what the parameters are on the law enforcement training side of things?
So
And just to be clear, it's for the public knowledge, not just her.
Right.
And so again, not to necessarily get into tactics that the law enforcement officers are using, but we start law enforcement in the state of Arkansas at the training academy. As officers are hired, they are put through a primary alert class at one of the state recognized training academies. And then for an agency similar to Hot Springs, I can speak to Hot Springs, it is annual mandated training for every officer. So it's not a one-time training, forget. It is something that we do on a very regular basis. We conduct training with our other law enforcement partners to ensure that when we respond, because we will all respond together in a critical incident, that we're on the same page. So it is methods of how to do solo response. Again, our officers are taught, we're not waiting on backup, we're going to the threat. Alert is very aggressive in that nature, as it should be. And then there are more detailed training segments that actually teach room clearing, casualty care, those type things. It's a very intensive.
How
overall
long are
program.
these trainings?
Depends on what level of training for the law enforcement aspect you're looking at. It can be anywhere from a multi-day training to multiple weeks, depending on if you're going to be a trainer or depending on what stage of the course you're going. The law enforcement side is much longer than the civilian side, and probably much more intense from the tactical side. We don't teach tactics necessarily to the civilian staff or civilian populace. We teach how to survive that initial encounter, to survive from the point the gunman starts the critical incident to the time we end it. And that can be anything from avoid, deny, defend, methods of how to secure your classroom, how to avoid the gunman, how to defend yourself and those around you, depending upon the situation that a gunman presents.
Thank you, Chief. I just think it's important for our educators, our parents, and our local law enforcement to hear that 4 hours of training at your local school, even though you grew up and knew everybody, could make a difference. And it's that sort of specialized training through Alert that we have done, and you all have done, and CGI and others have done across the state that can really save a life. It's twice the amount of time of this meeting every week. Could save lives.
Thank you, General. That was very, very helpful. Yes, sir.
So as we move forward, and I can already tell you that we're moving in the direction of recognizing Alert as the go-to. But Dr. Hopkins just made a statement to me that I was not aware of, that they do all this training free for law enforcement. And if you want to, you're a trainer, so you go out into your community. But my understanding from Dr. Hopkins is that it is not a free service to the CSSOs. So as we move forward and we deal with this, I think that's something we need to remember to address to make sure
Yes, sir.
that all are on board. The other thing that the general brought up was that parents, a community wants to know how safe a school is. And we were all frustrated and just maddened at the Uvalde incident, especially after all the work that we had been through. And that I know every state has gone through this process probably for it to continually happen. And in an outburst with a very high ranking person, I just said, I don't understand why we can't legislate and require. And that statement back to me was, in absence of legislation, perhaps we can shame schools into doing what they ought to be doing anyway. And I think, to your point, is that when communities want to know, there ought to be a rating system, a grading system that tells not only what is their academic achievement level and all of that, which is so important, but what is the level of security. I think parents have a right to know that. Anyway, there's my rant. Goodbye. Thank you.
That was actually one of the things that we had started talking about with respect to the school safety committee. That's under DESE. Yes, sir.
So we were having a sidebar discussion from a training aspect. One of the things that Alert is very adamant about is the training of those around you, the civilian training. I mean, it is, and they push us as trainers to go into our communities and train. There is a cadre of trainers across this state that are very highly qualified to teach one of those three aspects that Alert presents. I believe that if you were in my region with the number of trainers that I have at my disposal, I would be happy to train
There
your
you go.
CSSOs because they're going to be my responding partners in
That's
those type
correct.
critical incidents. And I think Alert, appreciates that concept. And I think as law enforcement, we are obligated. My training staff is obligated to educate and train those in my region and my community. So I believe there are enough trainers statewide that type of program could be easily developed, whether we did it regionally, quarterly, just divided the state into 4 quarters. But I think there's enough law enforcement officers in this state that are excellent trainers that are more than willing to work on a program similar to that.
Anything else? Great discussion. Absolutely wonderful discussion. That's why we're all here. Okay. The next thing that I want to talk about is, let me first mention that the next meeting on the 19th, I had to look at what day today is. On the 19th, we're going to have at least one or more people from Congressman Hill's office that's going to be here to talk to us about some of that new federal school safety legislation and where the grants are going to be. I think it's important that we as a commission look at grants. What I'm going to do today is kind of a little mini kind of discussion of grants, because I know of 2 grant programs that are available. And I also was able to get some information from Senator Bozeman's office that was very helpful in detailing some of this. The 2 programs that I'm aware of, grant programs, federal grant programs that I am aware of, one is under the Office of Community Policing Services. As we all affectionately refer to it as the COPS office, COPS, COPS office. And they have a school violence prevention program. They've had this grant in place, I think, since 2019. And it is geared towards, it's open primarily to school districts because they're under, units of local government. It's also available to law enforcement agencies. The one little caveat is that it does require a 25% match. But sometimes with some of these match programs, they will waive the match amount. But there are other things that we might be able to help schools meet that match. But it's for things like metal detectors, locks, lightings, and other deterrent measures. It's for coordination with law enforcement. And Dr. Hopkins, you were in my head when I read that, because you talk about how critically important it is for the CSSOs to coordinate with law enforcement. And that in order to do that, you have to train. So this would be a potential source of funding for that. Technology for the expedited notification of local law enforcement. And any other measure the COPS office determines may provide significant improvement in security. I was able to go back and look at the number of awards that we've gotten in Arkansas, and they're very low. They're very, very low. It only showed 1 award in 2019 for the Danville School District. There were no awards in 2020. And I think there were 3 awards in 2021, but I only found 2 of them. And one of them was the Pangburn School District, and I think Springdale School District also received an award. The other grant is the Bureau of Justice Assistance grant. We as a state have been much more successful now, on the COPS School Violence Prevention Program. I don't know how many applications were submitted. you know, like the Danville application was for over $100,000. I know the Pangburn was close to 90,000. So it's not like they're getting a small amount of money. They're getting enough money to be able to do some of these things that's specified in this grant program. The BJA Stop School Violence Grant is more focused on behavioral threat assessment, anonymous reporting systems, mental health within our schools. And actually, as a state, we've been pretty successful. In 2019, CJI, we received the BJA grant for $1 million, and that's focused on behavioral threat assessment. You know, of course, you know, shortly after 2019 came 2020, and our world's changed because of COVID, and that slowed things down tremendously. But we've been making big progress. In 2019, there was also a grant awarded through a cooperative extension service, but it went through a company called Stop It Solutions, and it was an anonymous reporting system, and they were able to, I think, get 49 school districts on board, at least for a couple years, through this $250,000 grant. Then the city of Texarkana also received one of these BJA grants, and it was close to $140,000. Our Department of Education, which we now call DESE, they received a $500,000 award in 2019 for crisis response teams for our schools. UAMS did a grant on telemedicine and trauma-informed response. And I think the title of their grant was Mental Health and School Violence. And that was for $500,000. And then I think it looks like the Springdale School District in 2020 received a $1.5 million grant. So once again, you know, I don't know whether these grants are being submitted for. So I don't have any idea, you know, how many folks in Arkansas are applying these grants, but how and what the distribution per application would be. But I most certainly think that both these grant programs are potentially ways in which our schools and law enforcement and statewide agencies in some instances can use these funds to do some good things. Dr. Hernandez and Dr. Hopkins, how are schools with respect to applying for grants?
I can just speak to that is a conversation that has happened in the last several months of asking questions. The two that I'm familiar with are the two that you've mentioned. I think some have asked about what federal grants make them about. I know with the school, I don't know exactly what the name is of the federal act that just got passed. It has several different funding streams. One of them in the language talks about potential for school resource officers and campus hardening, I think is the term.
Yeah, and that's what Congressman Hill's staff are going to talk about next time. What I was asking is mostly the idea that are schools equipped to apply for grants? Maybe that's a better way to put it.
You know, just in my experience working at both a large school and a small school, I was actually at Danville, and Danville has always been really successful at grant writing. And that's because when I was there, we hired an English teacher part-time to be a grant writer. So getting anything from safety to equipment on the playground to lots of community grants. At Hot Springs, we had somebody that was able to write grants. So not every district, I would say, is equally equipped to access grants or have the ability to research and write grants, because as most of you know, grant writing is an art form, and sometimes getting those things, especially outside of the state, are very cumbersome and hard to get sometimes if you don't have the appropriate folks.
Dr. Hopkins?
Well, I know of two COP grants that we're working on in our district. And the first one, we were actually working with a consultant to help us with that. And as we got into it, we had difficulty with the submission process. And we didn't feel like we had the energy to get it done and get it done in the time that the submission required. And so we dropped that, and we're going to look at it again next year. And then our resource officer working with the Clarksville Police Department has submitted a COPS grant to seek funding to help add an additional school resource officer to
Yeah.
our district. And so,
That's through the COPS hiring program, which
Yes.
is a slightly different grant program than.
now,
than this.
obviously those grants, they're kind of a startup type grant. They kind of get the ball rolling and get the person hired, but it's not, indefinite. It eventually the money runs out and you have to have a mechanism to pick that up. So grants are great for a lot of things, but you can't necessarily hang your hat on
Oh, no,
grants.
trust me, I totally understand that. But when we're needing to do something.
Well, sure. But we struggle at Clarksville with being able to find the personnel to just sit down and write grants. I mean, we have received grants in the past. We've actually hired grant writers and done things of that nature in the past, but sometimes it's hard to find the personnel to just dedicate to that.
Anybody else want to make any comments on this? Dr. Dunn? Yes, ma'am.
I think it's going back to the presentation about what happened in Uvalde and just about the aftermath. I mean, do we know because this is part of our subcommittee talking about kind of, after a traumatic event. So what kind of resources, what's happening in the community, and kind of how that might inform anything in our state. I don't think it was specifically addressed.
I don't have any current
Okay.
data as to any type of after action or mental health for the students, staff, officers. So if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking how.
No information on any type of debrief, no.
How
Emotional
kind
debrief. at
yeah.
all.
But like the primary and then all the secondary trauma, for the community and actually everybody. I don't know, do you have any other follow-ups about that? So were you kind of wondering the same thing? As we've been talking about this on our committee. Yeah, is there anywhere you would suggest looking for that, more on that information? I don't even know where to look.
We may cover some of that.
Yeah, potentially the finalized report may cover some of that, just on a side note, just watching media coverage, I hear, of course, that there's mental health professionals that have been on scene, there's pastors that are helping. But as to how much or how detailed, any type of long-term emotional care, I don't have that information.
It's something we've been talking about in our subcommittee, and I don't know if I don't want to preempt or steal your thunder, but is sometimes the type of response matters. And from your experience, from what I heard about what happened here in 98 and kind of, just making sure that we're thoughtful about our recommendations about that. Everybody wants to help, but sometimes, right.
Yeah.
We want to make sure it's appropriate. And I'm a psychiatrist and I wouldn't specifically know, how to respond in that. Not just anyone who's a mental health provider has the appropriate training,
ma'am.
just like we're talking about with training for specific types of incidents. So I just want to make that comment. Thanks.
Okay. Deadlines. We need to get the 2022 school safety assessment done. If you all remember, we did one in 2019. It's been tremendously helpful. I've asked you all, I've asked the chairs of the subcommittees to make sure that I get your approved questions by end of today. I have been communicating with Dr. Slagle at UA Little Rock. And we are getting ready to rock and roll. My hope, my absolute hope, is that we can get at least some preliminary results by early August. I think it would be very helpful when our report comes back. So please, it's really important that we have those. And I'm trying to think, and Chief Chapman, I will go ahead and wait until your subcommittee to talk about cyber, if that's okay with you, sir. Having said that, interim report, I've asked the subcommittee chairs to provide me with a draft by July 22nd. We need to make sure that we get the interim report to the governor by August 1st, which is just a little way away. So, planning things out. And if you need any direction on that, I'm obviously here to help, and I'll be looking at the general introduction and some general things that go across several of the individual subcommittees. So, all right. Having said that, let's go ahead and move on to our subcommittee reports. So, Director Kane, got you starting first time. Lori can sit back and relax for a little bit.
Madam Chair, we met last Wednesday and we spent most of our time finalizing the survey assessment questions. There was an issue raised regarding barricades meeting fire prevention codes. We made an adjustment on that question there. We talked about this last week, but it came up again because it's something that's going to be a recommendation, and that's in the law in 1213-109. It requires all doors and exits to remain unlocked. So that's something that that we're going to recommend to the legislature to change the law to require those to remain locked during school hours. That was Sheriff Hilder's recommendation. So as we're discussing these questions, it also kind of spills over into priorities as well as recommendations. And I think that's going to help us the last couple of weeks as we nail down these recommendations, because that conversation's been happening. One thing that was raised also by our state architect was there needs to be one action to get out of a classroom door. And we talked about this in the past, Dr. May. So one of the questions we're going to ask is what percentage of classroom doors in the district are equipped with locks so the door can be locked from the inside, allow for key access from the outside from authorized personnel, and also allows for code compliant egress in the case of a fire or another emergency. We talked about possibly not every classroom is locked unless in a lockdown, because that's determined by school districts for classroom doors. And this goes back to a discussion that we had in another subcommittee where Mr. Berra had talked about that. I think we're all in agreement, though, they need to be locked in the locked position for classroom doors. And there were some other discussions there, but basically one of the things we decided to do was to break it down by campus in the questions. So I thought it was some good discussion, and I sent those out. It kind of cleaned it up a little bit, sent it out, and Dr. May, I sent those to you yesterday.
Super.
The final on that. So we turn next to, we started talking about physical security priorities. We wanted to talk about, what's our top 5. And we were all in agreement that exterior door access was number 1, with a preference for electronic access control. When we started talking about the number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, there was some disagreement over the order of those. I think there was a consensus there that all these 4 needed to be in there. And those were your secure vestibules, classroom doors remaining locked, Also, we talked about what Chief Hollenbeck had brought up early on, and that was the importance of the master lock be given to law enforcement officials. So what we're going to do tomorrow is really focus on those priorities and our recommendations and start getting those nailed down, because we only got 2 more meetings before the deadline.
Yeah, and that's the interim report, remember,
Right,
because we're not done August
Um,
1st.
right.
Just
Yes,
remember
ma'am.
that, because the final report will be in October.
But
And we'll be able to, get a lot more information and hammer out these new recommendations as we go forward. But I think you're right. It's important to at least bring up some of these potential new recommendations that we want the commission to consider. Absolutely.
and if anybody else would like to comment, if there's anything I left off, please do so.
Oh, I guess Chief Chapman is up next.
Thank you, ma'am. We had a very insightful meeting last week. We were able to nail down our survey questions based on the recommendations. We focused in on recommendation 1 and 2. Recommendation 1, we developed the question, does your school district have a communication plan that is utilized to notify school officials, students, and parents of an ongoing critical incident? A simple yes or no question. If they marked yes, then we broke down several subcategories that we'd like to know if they were using these versions of communication, whether that be mobile apps, email systems, phone notification, social media platforms, or direct radio communication. We felt like that would give us a better overall concept of how they are communicating with their students, parents, and staff members during a critical incident. Recommendation 2, does your school district have direct communication with local law enforcement through a radio system? And this is beyond the radio communication that an SRO would have. So a simple yes or no question. And if yes, is your system part of the AWIN statewide radio system? A yes or no question. And if direct communication is not part of the AWIN statewide system, do the radios used have AWIN capabilities? And we'd kind of touched on that several meetings ago about the importance of, even if you're not on the AWIN system, having that capability as state resources are poured into that critical incident. And then we determined that recommendation 3 and 4, even though we had several questions related to those recommendations, they probably fit better into the mental health and prevention side. And I believe Courtney forwarded those questions over to our counterparts at that subcommittee. And then we had one overall question that we felt was relevant to everyone that we would like to recommend. And it would be simply based added to the end of the survey, based on your school district's experience since the 2018 School Safety Commission report, do you have any suggestions or recommendations to this committee? We felt like it'd be good to hear back from everyone. These questions were vetted by the subcommittee. I didn't hear any negative feedback from my committee members or the committee members, so these will be given to you by the end of the day today as our recommendation for survey questions. Moving forward, we have subject matter experts presenting next week on Little Rock School District's information sharing platform. We have some additional work to be done in cybersecurity presentations. And then last week, we also had a presentation from Dr. May on CJI's capabilities and cyber training program, and I will let her speak to that, ma'am. That concludes my report.
Great, Chief. You guys did have a really good meeting last time. I think when we met as a group last time, we had members from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Administration. I got it right this time. Somebody write that on the calendar, which we call CISA. They are the premier organization in the federal government that focuses on cybersecurity. And while they focused on what they were doing in terms of the ability to do site safety assessments, they also are a potential resource for what we call vulnerability assessments. Now, one of the things that I think it's important, and I was able to give a presentation at the DESE Summit yesterday, I think it's important that we kind of really frame why cybersecurity is so important and why nationally that it's under the umbrella of school safety by many, 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 many organizations. Kind of like the school shootings, you know, for some odd reason, or unlike the school shootings, for some odd reason, when there are major cyber incidents, it doesn't always hit the airways, that there's not a lot of media attention on cybersecurity. So there was some research that I did, and we actually, in Arkansas last year, 2021, we actually had 3 cyber attacks on schools. And the way they define schools is it's K through 12 and also higher ed. And there were, while there were 3 attacks, there were 8 schools impacted in our state. It disrupted 9,104 students. And their estimated cost because of the downtime that resulted was, and I think this is a dollar figure, $152,423,000. So let me put this in a slightly different perspective for you. In 2021, there were 1,000 schools in the US that were affected by a type of malware called ransomware. You've all heard of ransomware. Ransomware is where the entire system is captured and held hostage, literally. And they're usually the ransom. They ask for an amount, and the disadvantage is that you don't get access to your materials. You're completely shut down as far as your system is concerned. Now, they, like many systems, and particularly our schools, you've got to understand that our schools contain a variety of very ripe personal information on individuals, not only the students, but also the staff. Ransomware, this type of malware, the amounts ranged in 2021 from $100,000 to $40 million. Now, why are schools a target? Well, because schools are seen as having a lot of money. Because you got to realize that this whole thing is about one and only one thing. It's about money. Now, why would they want to have access to individuals' information? I'm sure many of you, and it's not just the students, but it's also information on the parents that schools do contain. It's the idea of identity theft. Being able to get access to so much information that some of our kids can have their identity stolen before they're even adults, and can go and start to make money and borrow money and those sorts of things. Also, human trafficking. Having the personal information of our students could get sold on the dark web. That could allow them to be targeted for things like human trafficking. Human trafficking has substantially increased in our country over the past decade. And it's become a very, very lucrative business. You know, just like drugs, you know, for cartels and stuff, it's a business. But when it comes to the drug part of it, you have a quantity of drug and you sell that and then it's gone. But with human trafficking, it's a constant thing because it's a human being that's sold and used for sex trafficking and so on and so forth. And many of our kids end up getting caught to that. Sextortion is another one of a recent cyber nature, where, and it just seems like lately it's been boys that are convinced to get naked and take a picture and send it to somebody. And then there's consequences, usually financial consequences for that. So there are very good reasons why our schools should be concerned about cybersecurity because it is an important concern. CJI is the lead right now because I'm chair of this consortium. We're lead in what's known as the National Cybersecurity Preparedness Consortium. And we have 5 universities. It's all in the handout. The presentation that I provided you, I don't want to go over this presentation again, but it's the University of Texas, San Antonio, Texas A&M at the Texas Engineering and Extension Service that many people know as TEEX, the University of Memphis, and also the Norwich University, which is in Vermont. We have a variety of cybersecurity. Our philosophy is based on the idea that in order to have the most robust cybersecurity posture, it takes every member of an organization or every member of a community. So you don't want to just train IT people. You need to make sure that everybody within your organization, including leadership, is trained. And so we have training programs that are detailed in here that are for each of those, primarily what we call end users or individuals. It just takes one click, somebody to click on the wrong thing, that can get a computer system infected with a virus. And that can spread to not only within your organization, but outside your organization. One thing that we don't do, and I don't understand this, is that we don't make bigger deals about protecting each other if there's a cyber incident. It's kind of like kept a little quiet. We need to make sure that we let constituents know. How many times have you heard about banks being hacked and our private information being stolen, but 18 months ago, not now, not real time? How do we need to know to be able to protect our data, to keep our eyes, to make sure everything is going to be fine. So this presentation primarily focuses on all the things that we do. The key thing about what we do with the National Cybersecurity Preparedness Consortium is that all of our services are free because they are federally funded. We're funded through FEMA, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. All of these programs are certified by FEMA, and it's a very arduous process. And they are available at no cost. A lot of them are web-based, which makes them more accessible. The in-person ones, we only have so many deliveries within each grant. Past 2 years, we've gotten a $4 million appropriation, and it looks like we're going to get another federal appropriation this year. Needless to say, I want Arkansas to be able to benefit from these resources because I think they can have an impact there as well. The consortium website is nationalcpc.org, and all of the information is there. Speaking of websites, we've been having some discussions about being able to get input from other people to the consortium, to the commission. And next week, we are actually going to hear from some students. And it's Chief Chapman and Marvin Burton, Assistant Principal Burton, that are going to get a group of students together so that they can tell us their feelings about school safety, their feelings about shooting incidents, and be able to ask them a lot of questions. But we also want to be able to have the public provide us with some input. So we have set up an email address at the Criminal Justice Institute, and that email address is public, PUBLIC, input, INPUT, at cji.edu. And that if the public wants to make a comment, they can email this address, and it'll be reviewed by somebody at CJI, and I will also look at them and bring comments before the commission. So that's the end of I overtook your thing, Chief Chapman. So thank you for that opportunity. Director Gary. Who was going to do Director Gary's? Oh, that's right, Director Kane.
Madam Chair, the audits, emergency operating plans and drills subcommittee met last Thursday. We spent the time refining and finalizing the survey assessment questions. Some example of a few that we talked about was, have you completed your comprehensive school safety audit as required by Act 620 and 648 of 2021? In completing the comprehensive school safety audit, did you use the free U.S. Department of Education site access mobile app? And the reason for that was we're trying to get an idea of how many have used that and received the training from that, because it is free, a free service. And that kind of led into a discussion about professional services out there that have marketed doing audits or assessments out there. And so some of the cost of those were talked about, and some concerns are raised that not everybody knows about the services that were available through CISA and other entities out there. So that's something that was discussed at the meeting. One thing that a question that the team came up with is, do you routinely evaluate security procedures like Mr. Vera does at his district? And if so, do you test locked perimeter doors, locked interior doors, ensure staff are wearing ID badges, ensuring visitors logs have logged in and wearing badges, and are the drills completed? Because those are the 5 things he looks at. So the committee thought that would be a good question to ask. And then some other ones, do you have a comprehensive emergency operation plan? That's obviously very important. But I thought it was a good meeting, a lot of good discussion on it. And Mr. Gary sent those out, Director Gary sent those out to us to review. And so the committee members are reviewing those and will reply to that.
Great, and I should be able to get those today, correct? Okay, super. Sheriff Felder.
Madam Chair, obviously with our deadlines, we spent a great deal of time trying to finalize our survey questions. Changes were made to number 2 and 3. Spent a great deal of time talking about our number 6 suggestion, which dealt with critical incident command and communication. Happy to go over every question if you'd like now, or okay. The only thing that we did was on the fly today. We made the addition about let's see, where is it? Has your district had any formal active shooter training such as alert? I think you just mentioned that we need.
Right, but we had some questions that were specific to those agency or those schools that use CSSOs. So what we want to know is that, are those CSSOs receiving alert training, is the way I understood it.
In this meeting, just
Yeah,
today? Okay.
So that's what my intent was, I guess.
Let your fingers do the walking. Happy to make that.
Thank you.
That addition. And then, of course, we went over the Uvalde incident report provided by Alert, and a decision was made then to disseminate with our commission members and then to discuss today. And that's really what our meeting consisted of.
Yeah, you guys had a good meeting last time too.
Thank you.
Sheriff. Lori.
Thank you. We had a very long meeting Friday.
Yes, we
Almost
did.
3 hours, but our questions are finished. We started our meeting with a wonderful discussion and presentation from Angela Fortner, who is with Department of Education, and talked about TRIS and the responses that are available to schools in
And TRIS stands for Trauma Response in Schools. And it's a UAMS
yes.
program.
And we talked just about that in terms of, you know, some of the different initiatives that we've learned about this time in the last few weeks, what's grant funded, what's not, and how do we look at moving those things forward beyond the life of those grants, which is a common issue that we're talking about. It led into some very, very good discussion just about the supports and the responses to schools in general, and just kind of how to make things statewide, sustainable, how to create things that are available to all schools in the state in some way, even those that are very isolated. We talked about the mental health availability. We talked about a lot of things. And after her presentation, she, along with our SME, stayed as we went through our questions, and we went through all of our recommendations, kind of revamped our questions and finalized those. And just some really neat discussion happened as a part of that. So if I've not sent you those questions, you will have them before I leave this room today.
Thank you.
And that took us to
Now-
almost 3 hours on the questions, and I will go over those if you would like.
No, ma'am.
To.
No, ma'am, not necessary to go over all the questions.
Okay.
But this is the subcommittee that's also looking at the issue of behavioral threat assessment and the anonymous reporting.
Yes.
And so we're gonna have some really good discussions this coming week,
Yes.
I hope, on
You had
that.
mentioned possibly another school.
Yes,
to share with-
Springdale
So we'll hear from
School
Springdale
district
on
is gonna
Friday,
present.
and start really looking at what other states do we want to look at in terms of what they have available.
Oh, somebody's already started looking at different states, but I don't know who that would be.
Hmm. Okay. So yeah, we have a lot to do in the next couple of weeks, but
Yeah,
there's a lot of energy around it too.
yeah. No, that was a great discussion that you all had. Last time it was a long discussion,
Yeah,
but I think it was a very, very good one.
our schools want and need a lot of support,
Yes. And mental
Um,
health is such a huge part.
and just there are so many issues, you know, and as you all spoke earlier, the things that just keep coming to my mind. We ask so much of our teachers, and we're asking our teachers to be trained as mental health professionals, as what to do in an active shooter. How do I keep these babies that are charged to me safe? Being a social worker, making sure that they have food when they go home, making sure that they have clothes and an adult at home to take care of them. The teachers that I know, the things that they deal with every day. We expect so much of them. And so I'm just really mindful of that as we move forward and making this something where they are getting information that they feel is helpful and not overwhelming to them to do their jobs, because I think they feel overwhelmed a lot. So anyway.
Great. Yeah, no, you all had a great meeting and thank you for that report. Okay. So we are making great progress. Our next meeting is going to be July 19th. And I just want to give you a little bit of heads up that it may be a little bit longer than normal. You know, we've got the kids that are going to be here. I don't know, you know, how detailed of a discussion we're going to get into. We've got the grants discussion, and then we're going to have a lot as a commission to discuss some potential new recommendations that would be very advantageous for us to put in our preliminary report. So we could be here for a while. And then the subcommittees are going to be meeting as you all have this week. I think Director Kane is going to run audits, EOPs, and drills for Director Gary. I am going to be able to be on, even though I'm going to be in my car. But it's the law enforcement subcommittee I'm going to miss this week, and I'm sorry. I know. What can I say?
Is our SME still set up?
Your SME.
We're setting up. Sorry. We had discussed at our last meeting, you suggested an SME to speak about her
Oh,
incident, so that will not be
No, but I think I can maybe make that happen.
Well, it can be later. I thought
Okay.
it was.
Okay, yes, thank you for that reminder. You're absolutely correct.
Yes, ma'am.
Let me see what I can do. Okay. Anything else that we need to discuss? Thought we had a real good meeting today. Thank you all. And I will entertain that most important, an important motion. Dr. Hopkins made a motion to adjourn. Do I hear a second? Okay. All right, y'all. Be safe, careful. Thanks for all you do and look forward to seeing you next week or in the subcommittee meetings.
Thank you.